Good morning. So this is a recap of our Unknown Lands campaigns. We played this on Saturday, March 11th. Session 1 and 2 were on November 26th of 2022. We haven't been able to get back to it until this last Saturday. Session 3. The first the first launch of these campaigns, we played about 4 hours, took a break, but we wrapped up because we didn't know what we were going to do for the second half of the day, and they wanted to keep going, so we ended up playing a session 2 on November 26th. So that did not occur Saturday. We just played for 7 hours. We took a short break for lunch and kept chugging. So this is technically one big session. They are not in, this is an addendum to my Broadland campaign books. This is the player map for that. This mountain range on the north, we're assuming that they are on the north side of this mountain range, having come over from the Castle Top region into the Unknown Lands. We are doing a West Marches-esque sandbox open world hex crawl. Okay. So, again, we're playing, where's it at? We're playing White Box Fantastic Medieval Adventure Game, my favorite OSR. We played this raw in session 1 and 2. Having had a few months in between, I made up some house rules that I introduced to them for session 3. I allowed them to veto any rule they did not like. They liked every rule, and matter of fact, they took advantage. They took advantage of 2 of these particular rules in the session 3. So house rules, I'll go ahead and list them so people are complete transparency how we're playing this. Again, sessions 1 and 2, which you can see the recap on the channel, were raw, rules as written. Session 3 on will feature these house rules, and I had jotted them in the back of the book, and then I allowed them to veto anything they didn't like. Among these will be many, won't be anything really that others haven't seen or used except my fight death option. Okay, so they start game at level 1. All new characters will start with full HP. Whatever their potential full HP is, they start level 1 full HP. However, once they level up, they have to roll all over everything, and they're stuck with whatever that roll is. Every time they level up, they'll roll their complete hit points over. But they all at least start with full hit point, whatever that potential is. If they have a +1 constitutional bonus, then they get that HP bonus of, let's say it's a fighter, 6 + 1 con, or actually fighter is HD 1 + 1 plus con, so they could have conceivably 8 hit points to start. Second option is a fight death option, which I'll talk about more in the recap as we actually use this option at the end of session 3. Sunder shield, sunder helmet, so they can choose to sunder either a shield or a helmet to completely negate the hit points of any blow. So it doesn't have to be the final blow. They could suffer a first blow in a combat and choose to sunder their shield to eradicate whatever this is. So it doesn't have to be their final death blow. It can be any attack. But the shield or the helmet is destroyed and they suffer no damage. So they can use a shield or a helmet to ignore any attack, and they can decide after damage is rolled. It gives them some tactical way of recognizing, holy cow, that was a 6 hit, that was a 6-point hit, I'm going to sunder my shield and eat that. It just gives them a little control over the lethality. Magic users are allowed to use any one-handed weapon. They can cast any spell that's in their spell book that they have, of course, studied that morning and confirmed in memory. So those rules haven't changed, but they're allowed to use any one-handed weapon. So going into this session, Phil had lost his character in session 2 And so he made a character using these new rules, and he made a magic user named Baldwin, and he's wielding a sword. And he has a spell book with 4 spells in it. He can choose which one he wants to memorize every morning. Again, he only has 1 spell slot. They must spend all treasure and gold to get XP from gold and treasure. So they can hold on to it, and then as they spend it, they'll get an XP for it, right? But it has to be treasure that they found or taken or won. It can't be treasure that they've already had with them. For instance, they all had, on average, they all had about 7 gold left from their character creation. But they have to spend the gold or the treasure to get XP. Dwarves can be fighter only. Halfling can be thief only. Elf can be fighter only, no variant, no dual class. So the elf is a fighter. He cannot be a magic user / fighter or a magic user. He can only be a fighter. Cleric and magic users are human only. They are allowed to bind wounds immediately after a battle is concluded. They're allowed to, Joe can bind wounds on Bill. Bill can bind wounds on Sarah. Sarah can bind wounds on Bill, right? And they all recover just 1 hit point. So all they have to do is treat each other and they'll get 1 hit point. That's it, though. They don't roll. They have to have 24 hours of complete rest to get the natural healing 1 hit point. So I just clarified what that meant 1 day. Basically, it would be 16 hours of rest with 8 hours of... they basically have to rest. Instead of an 8-hour night sleep, they're going to have to rest the full 24 hours. Complete, meaning they can't be interrupted by fishing, hunting, fighting off bandits that show up or something, right? They have to get complete rest, no armor, complete rest to heal 1 hit point. So that's pretty tense, but Rangers, I'm allowing a Ranger class using the elf variant rules. So that doesn't mean they're an elf, they are a human only, but the rules for the elf variant, or I should say, so I have a Ranger. Instead of writing a class, I'm just using the elf variant class on page 23, and instead of it being an elf variant, it is Ranger. Everything applies except you do not get the elf racial abilities, and you must be a human, but everything else is your Ranger, which means they can wield weapons, wear chainmail, and cast spells. That's the Ranger. Again, leveling up as a Ranger, as this elf variant, is double the average class. It's pretty serious. Like the magic user is 2,500 to level up to 2. The fighter's 2,000. The cleric is 1,500. The thief is 1,250. This is 5,000. So to get to level 2, it takes 5,000 XP to level up as an elf variant, which in my game will be Ranger. And Phil debated on making a Ranger until he saw that 5,000 XP to get to level 2, and he decided to go with the magic user because he wanted to be able to wear armor, use a weapon, and eventually cast spells. He wanted to be a Ranger, but he could have. It's just he's going to pay a heavy toll for that dual class. It's almost the dual class. Okay, let's see here. Dead characters still receive XP share. So, for instance, at the end of session 2, on November 26th, Charles' character died. Phil's character Charles died in that session, but all XP was divvied up equally among the characters in the session, and that's just lost to a dead character. So they don't get to take their XP and reapply it. So they're not getting the share of any other character in the party, even if they die, right? Okay. So how the reason that works is, let's say, like what happened in session 3, a character goes down. If the player chooses to let that character die and not fight death, they would create a new character, and that character would receive the share of their old character's session XP. Well, and I'll talk about it more. Okay, so, and Hexcrawl, they automatically earn 5 XP for day they survive. If they complete a hex they actually move and investigate a hex, encounter whatever's in that hex, be it foraging, fishing, camping, fighting a creature, scavenging a ruins, entering a dungeon. If they survive a hex, they get 5 XP each per day. So this was a pretty lucrative adventure Saturday, as it was a 23 complete day adventure. So in one 7-hour session, it lasted 23 days. Very cool. It was a great session. And that's my house rules for the Unknown Lands campaign. Okay. So in session 1, they discovered a ruined keep that hid behind its broken down old stone walls a little village called Wellesley, and it turns out it's named after the Lord that lives in the remainder of this stone keep in his manse, is the Lord Wellesley. They meet everybody around the town. They meet the blacksmith Dodd. They meet what are my notes? They meet Zorro, the general store proprietor. They meet Vincent, the inn and tavern keep, who's technically renting them as headquarters rooms at the inn. It's kind of their HQ for the West Marches. Miss Samantha, who runs the brothel in this little town, this little village inside a broken down old stone keep, and Father Martel, who runs the local chapel, the Church of the Holy One. And then of course Lord Wellesley, which they were basically told by Zorro is off limits. Lord Wellesley doesn't want to, the people who pass through do business, and he has no interest in talking to outsiders. Well, they ended up meeting Lord Wellesley because in session 1 and 2, the werebeast that they captured turned out to be his son, Weber Wellesley. They resolved both the curse. They met the Lord. The Lord paid them, sent them on a witch hunt to find a witch who could cure his son, and therefore cure Charles. However, part of that ritual was they had to face off as werebeasts. That was part of the ritual, and whoever survived would ultimately be cured. And Weber Wellesley survived the encounter as they were chained together at midnight in the town center, and Charles felt his save versus death, which was save versus turn. So he felt the save to turn. He turned. That narrated ultimately then who would win. So that's how Phil lost his first character, Charles. Okay. So they met an old witch that they now are aware of. They've met everybody in Wellesley. They know of a place called Galdstad, which is where the old witch lives. It's an old abandoned mining village northwest. They know where Harrod's Ridge is now, because Harrod's Ridge is what they investigated that on behalf of Zorro in sessions 1 and 2. That's where they found the werebeast and captured it and brought it back. That was session 1 and 2. So they're headquartered in Wellesley. Josh's character, Brother Timothy, his headquarters is at the chapel, so he stays with Father Martel when they're in town. He resides free of charge in the Church of the Holy One. And then the other 3 stay at the inn for, I don't know how many coppers a day. That gives them, I think it's a gold piece a week. And that gets them a room for a week and 1 hot meal every day per person, right? Okay. So that was, and the first 2 sessions were a total of 9 days, almost 10 days had transpired. And that was sessions 1 and 2 on November 26th. Okay. Session 3, with house rules. I titled the other session afterwards. I always titled the sessions afterwards because I don't know what they're going to do. So the first session recap on the channel is called Blood of the Father. As the sire of Charles's curse had to fight his own, and the bloodline of Wellesley was involved, so I just called it Blood of the Fathers. This one was called Father's Footsteps because so when they create characters, and it's old school, 3 dice 6 straight down, you get what you roll, you pick your class based on whatever you want or can fit into. And then I always ask them, give me some kind of description of your personality and your look of your character. And I like a one sentence kind of motivation. Why are you here? What is your character about? I also generally write down their character data, but not all the time. And I'm not going to try to track their characters' attributes and stuff. I mean, but I do want to know the name of the character, where they're, kind of what their description is, and I want to know what that motivation is. Well, Katie's character, Marta, the halfling from Harrows. So the halfling area in my world is at Greenfields, and it's called the Harrows. And so she is Marta of Harrows, a halfling thief. And hers was, she's headed into the unknown lands to find her father, who had left and never came back. And so she's looking for data. She wants to find her father, or at least discover what happened to her father, who abandoned them and went on an expedition into the unknown lands. So when this session started, I told them, you've been hanging out in Wellesley for the last few weeks. And in that time, Marta learned from Rosie, a prostitute at the brothel, that she knew her father, Mart. So her name is Marta, so I named her father Mart. And so she's like Marta, which would maybe in the Harrow's halfling lore, Marta is daughter of Mart. Okay. And Rosie tells her, I met your father, Mart. He was passing through, and he was headed for the cold waters, on looking for a great Dwago treasure. They've discovered what Dwago means in the known lands. Dwago means dwarf. They discover that the cold waters means a river. There's a river called the Cold Waters, which runs north to south on this side of the mountains, and it leads to a great lake called Cold Waters Lake. And there's also basically a mountain island in there called Cold Water Mountain. That's all they learned from Rosie. So Marta then convinces the group, and by the way, in the couple of weeks that they would have been banging around Wellesley deciding what to do, Phil made his new character, Baldwin, a magic user, and he shows up in Wellesley, and he befriends them, and he joins the group. So it was a very simple narrative. How's Baldwin involved? Well, he meets them here, and he wants to go with them. So they gladly accept Baldwin into their adventure team. I asked them all to quickly create backup characters. Don't name them or anything. Just make some backup characters quickly. Roll them up. But don't worry about naming them or giving them a class or anything right now. Just have them ready. And two of those characters became retainers that Marta acquired before they left. Okay, so Katie, Marta, she rallies them all together and says, oh my God, Rosie's told me my father was here, and we need to head for a river called the Coldwater River, and we need to head north on the Coldwater River and find this place called Cold Waters, and that's where my father was supposed to have been going. They know that's roughly northeast outside of Wellesley. They don't know how far or anything. Rosie's never been that out of town, right? But that's the rumor around town. And they have 112 gold, all told. They earned 100 from the Lord for saving his son. They divvy that up, so it's 25 gold each. And they haven't spent it. So they pool all their money, 112 gold, and they barter with the general store owner, Zero, and the blacksmith. Marta wants their wagon, their cart. She wants the mule, and she wants some gear. She wants tools, shovels, ropes, rations, and she needs retainers. And, of course, Zero tells her, I'm not going to rent you a cart and a mule I may never get back. I'll sell them to you. The blacksmith agrees that he will loan them some tools, but they don't have enough, and she fails a reaction check. So she negotiates with Zero. We make the roll. She has a plus charisma, so she should be the one making the roll, but she still ultimately can't convince Zero to give her the whole deal and find her two retainers for their 112 gold. But he says, he takes the 112, and he says, I will sign a contract with all of you for 1/5 of any treasure you find, which will ultimately belong to Lord Wellesley, and I'll get to keep what I can sell from that. So really, he's bartering a 1/5 tax for Lord Wellesley, and they agree. They all sign a contract with Zero that they will bring. They will gladly give 1/5 of any treasure they come back with as basically as payment slash tax to Zero for his mule, his cart, rations, torches, and it's just a cart, so it's something that a mule can carry, and then the mule itself, and then the blacksmith gives him a shovel and a pickaxe and a 10-foot pole, and those were given. Remember, they made pretty good relationship with Dodd in session 1 and 2, and she won her reaction check with the blacksmith Dodd, and he gladly loaned, basically just gave her some stuff. Okay. Once they have all that together, they head northeast, and we move through Hex 1. Again, this was a 23 complete day adventure. It was unbelievable. They found the river. They were on the west side of the river. The river's too wide and too unknown for them to try to swim across. They have no boat. They have a mule and a cart. Oh, and by the way, they get Paul and Paul the Younger as their retainers, which would be Brian and Josh's backup characters. Two of the backup characters they rolled up. So we got Paul and we got Paul the Younger. So we have a son, we have a father and a son, baggage handlers, torch bearers, camp makers, right? So they're in charge of the mule and the cart and all the gear and camping, and they would be available as backup characters. And they, of course, will get paid from Zero out of the 1/5 treasure. Okay, so they travel a full day, camp unmolested. They find the river the second day. They're on the west side of it, and they just decide to follow the river. So they can, a couple things can occur. They can avoid becoming lost, and they know this river's headed. They know this river is the Coldwater River because they were told by Rosie roughly where it was at and what it was called, and they can tell from the steam, this eternal fog that's constantly rising off the river. So they can't really see well across the river. They can't really tell what the other opposite bank is all the time. There are moments in the day when the sun will burn off some of the fog, and they can see clearly across the river, but it's roughly 40 to 60 feet across in most places. It runs, in some places it runs very slow, which means it's very deep, and there's other places where there's rapids. But they don't have a boat anyway. But they want to stick to this because they think this river will lead them to Coldwater Lake, inevitably, and eventually the Coldwater Mountain, right? Which is, again, what they're looking for. Along the way, they encounter giant crabs on the west coast, west shore, which they escape from. They don't engage at all. They run. They just flat out run, and that was good because 8 giant crabs would have probably been a TPK for them. So they escape these giant crabs. They don't get any XP for that. They flat flee. They didn't embrace them. They didn't injure them, and they didn't suffer damage. So I want to talk about that. If you receive damage in a combat, and you can inflict damage in a combat, and you can ultimately survive that combat, I will give XP for it. Not in completely defeating the creature, but that you will receive XP for it. They completely just ran from these. They didn't embrace it at all, which is good because it just was a bad idea early in their adventure with a cart and a mule. They end up camping. Now they fled and they got lost, which meant they ran away from the river to get away from the crabs. I rolled for another lost check. So I make a lost check. Even though they're following the river, I make a lost check on every hex. They may not get lost, but there could be something that slows them down, that the lost failure. Well, they end up fleeing away from the river, and they end up lost. So they lose 2 days, kind of lost, until they can get their bearings and rediscover the river away from the crabs. So it's like they run away and have to circle back up north and come back to the river. They pursue that for another, I think, 2 days, and they arrive at a dock, a fishing shack and a dock. They can tell somebody lives here. There is a smoldering fire. There is gruel warm over the smoldering fire on a fire pit. There is a wooden bowl of half-eaten gruel. Garwin the dwarf sticks his finger in and it's still warm. And this is early in the morning on the fifth day. And they can see a little dock, and they can see a coiled rope, and they investigate the dock, and they learn that the dock has damage. So there's been a boat that's been docked there that steadily bangs into the dock. So they can see where on the dock where the boat bangs against it and slams against it, etc. The rope is coiled, it's in good condition, but it's old, it's worn. And they decide, clearly, somebody lives here, or a family, something. There is no evidence it's a family. There's one cot. There's, utensils enough for one or two people. So they figure it's a fisherman, a local fisherman. And they decide to make camp here. And the party sleeps inside this little shack. The torchbearers and baggage handlers sleep outside around the fire with the gruel pot and the mule and the cart. The next morning, Paul and his son wake the group and tell them that a boat's coming back up the river slowly because it's against the river's current. So he is rowing against the river. It's a fairly good size fishing boat with a sail, so it can get aid based on the wind conditions. They come outside, and as he approaches he arrests the boat as it's and basically parleys with them from the center of the river safely away from the group because he doesn't know who they are. We have a couple of reaction checks. He docks the boat. They share breakfast, and they learn that he is indeed an old fisherman. They learn that he, for money will take people along the river or across the river. He warns that the east side of the river has had some orc activity. He doesn't recommend that they cross the river. They learn that this is indeed the Coldwater River. And they learn that about 10 days' journey, 90 miles or so north downriver, is Coldwater Lake. He has never been there. He's never been that far in his life. He basically stays around and fishes and he tells them that, of course, that you can use this river to traverse there. As far as he's aware, there's no bridges and there's no dangerous rapids that he's aware of from here on. But again, he's never been more than 18 to 24 miles away from this dock, and this is about 90 miles north downstream. They cannot convince him to take them, so they agree with a second contract. They've given all their gold to Zero with the contract, all 112 gold pieces as kind of a down payment, plus they signed a contract with Zero. They make a deal with this old man. Give us your boat. We'll leave Paul and his son here to help you fish from the shore, and we'll leave the mule and the cart here, and they will aid you until we return with your boat, and we will give you, we will pay you per day. I think they agreed, where are my notes? I got a lot of notes. They agreed to, on day 5, yep, here it is. Himlane is his name, by the way, Himlane. And they agree to 12 gold pieces per day that they're gone. They already know that it's 10 days further north. So this guy's guaranteed, they got to come back with something because he's going to get 12 times 20. He's going to get a pretty fat paycheck. Right? Okay. But they're looking for Marta, and supposedly her father, Mart, was on the trail of a Duago buried treasure in the Coldwater Mountain. And again, a Duago in the northern tongue is dwarf, which of course gets Brian's character, Garwin, pumped to see a Duago, northern dwarf culture. Okay. So they hit the river, and they're told, use the cell to help. There is no way to use poles on the bottom. There is, at least in the next 24 miles. He tells them the river bottom, you can't touch it with a pole, so you won't be able to use poles to push the boat. You can row the boat and you can sail the boat, and it's just a fishing boat. It holds the 4 characters, but it's fairly tight. And he tells them again, the east side, he has more than once had to dodge arrows from orcs on the east shores, but aside from that, he's only had issues in river with fish, giant fish and fish. Now he said he warns there's some big fish, but unless they get into the river, don't worry about it. And the big warning is fog, especially the first 4 hours of the day. It's very foggy until it heats up enough that it can break. Okay, and he warns that being in the river is very deadly, as it is indeed the cold water river. So they don't want to be in the river for any period of time. Okay. They end up 3 days downriver. I think it's roughly 3 days downriver. They are indeed shot at by orcs on the eastern shores. Marta is injured, and Garwin and Baldwin, the magic user, Phil's character, is injured. They escape, by rowing and just staying as far west as they can, and they get by him. I don't give them any XP for this. It's straight fleet, although they took some damage. Later, though, they're overtaken by these same orcs. A couple of days later, they're in the middle of the night. Some orcs had crossed the river somehow, some way, they don't know how, and they were ambushed at camp. They were able to kill 4 orcs. They did suffer damage, and they were shot at again by archers, orc archers from the other side of the river here, and they did escape in the middle of the night after fighting off the 4 orcs, and they received a full XP then for not only encountering, killing some of them, and again a second complete escape. They got full XP for that. But I told them the orcs are obviously following them along the east shore, so the reality is they could run into these remainder of this platoon of orcs, again. Okay. They have not dispatched them. They've only escaped them twice, and they've killed 4. But they couldn't do a precise head count, and I used the D6, D6 1 to 2 for all of them. They could all make a D6 1 to 2 check to try to do a head count. 2 of them succeeded, 2 of them failed, and I said, because only 2 of you have a conflicting number, and the other 2 think they counted 18, the other 2 give them bizarre numbers. Like, one guy said it was only 8, and the other guy said it was right. So I basically told them your best guess is anywhere between 12 and 20 of these things. But they later killed 4. So, and it was at night, so they certainly couldn't do a head count escaping at night the second time. Day 9, I think day 10, 11, they witness on the west shore a wolf man drinking in the evening on the west shore, and that they discuss. They don't want to dock on the east side at all, because they know these orcs are actively along that, and they think their orcs are trying to keep up with them as they move down the river. They now see this werewolf, drinking from the edge, and it stands up, and it's clearly half man, half wolf, and it's snarling and smelling the air. And they decide they're going to sleep on the boat and ride the river for that next day or so. And they just resolve shifts, just like they're camping, and we just rotate. Day 11, they enter the lake. They can see it broaden, and they know now that they've entered the lake. It's too foggy to see the far shore. It's too foggy to see the so-called mountain called Coldwater Mountain, which is supposed to be an island mountain. They just can't see. It isn't long before they're in the middle of the lake, and they now can't see the west shore. They can't see the east shore, and they can't see the southern river head, and they cannot see what's north of them. And they're in the fog, and they're in the middle of this lake, and they end up lost for 3 days before they hit shore. So I'm rolling lost checks. Number 1, they can't see the stars. Number 2, there is no visible, it's like they're in the ocean, there's no visible way to see a shore so they can track it. And because they're lost, they end up basically going, they might go northeast for a while and then circle back. They might go north. So they're literally in the fog lost on this lake, this massive cold water lake. They fish, though, because their rations ran out about 5 days in. They got fish from Himlane. They eat that fish, and then they throw nets over, and they would troll while they would just naturally let the nets troll fish for them while they traveled. So they were always able to eat fish. They get on the lake, same thing. So they've had no issue with food. Okay, they've been eating fish, basically, raw. They can't really cook it on the boat. So they basically, eat it raw. Okay. But it means they don't have to use all their standard rations, which they still have, I think, 2 days or 3 days of standard rations. And I do require they eat and drink at least once a day, and they have to rest, or they're going to suffer negatives. Okay. They ultimately find a shore. They don't know if they literally can't see the stars at night. They know roughly east and west as they can see the sun come up, so they know roughly what's north and what's east and what's west due to the sunrise. But they finally, on day, I think it's day 15, 16, they find a shore. And as they hike along the shore into the inland, they come to a river and a waterfall, and they know from what they were told by the fishermen that it is supposedly the cold mountain has a majestic waterfall. They've come to a mountain base with a majestic waterfall pouring on this side. They can see up about 30 feet. There are caves in the brush and the trees next to the waterfall, and they begin the ascent with ropes. And again, as long as they have tools, I don't make them make checks. As long as they have a hook and a rope, they can automatically ascend at a normal pace, unimpeded. They don't make any checks. If you have tools, you don't have to make checks, and it also speeds up progress. So they can move at a decent rate. So they're up that, like in one turn, 30 feet up, boom, boom. They're in the mouth of this cave, and they can now see out over the fog, and they can see, they cannot see the southern or eastern shores. It's a massive lake. It's almost like an ocean. But they can see over the fog, and they can see that it's beautiful. Of course, they're above the fog at this point. So the fog hangs low, creating a ceiling at about 25 feet. So they've been trapped in this fog that's crushed down on the water, only about 20, 25 feet high. So once they're about 30 feet high, they're above this like cloud layer that's, it's like a lake effect cloud layer that's really low. And they decide to camp here and debate they're obviously in the caves, and what do we do? And they the next morning pack up. They get in line, Garwin leading, Brother Timothy second, Marta third, Thief, and then bringing up the back the magic user Baldwin. And they're pretty comfortable in this situation, even though Baldwin would be greatly exposed on the backside. Anyway, they trudge into the cave, and they travel for another 2 days before they are camping in a cave, and they feel like they're slowly ascending. The dwarf is able to identify that there's a slight ascent, but not a big one, but they're going up into the depths of the mountain, not down into the depths of the mountain. They know that much from Garwin, right? Garwin can tell they're ascending slightly. 2 days in, camping, they are ambushed at night by 6 gnomes. They make a reaction check. They were surprised, but the gnomes do not immediately attack. They make a reaction check. I give them a bonus because these gnomes are enamored by the dwarf and the halfling. So it's a very positive interaction. They discovered that they are known as the Hodo gnomes, and that they have a village here in the mountain heights, inside the mountain, a village with a chief, and they're invited to come back to the village and meet the chief, and he would love to meet Dwagos, right? This is the first time they realize the gnomes, in talking to Knackle is his name, that the scout leader of these gnomes that ambush him at the middle of the night. They learn in hiking upward, deeper into the mountaintops, internal mountaintops. They learn from Knackle that they're gnomes, they're a gnome tribe, and that There are legends of the Duago in their lifetimes, but they've never seen a Duago. The legend is the Duagos live in the bowels of this mountain and have great treasure, but they have never had encounter with them. They've never seen them. So they're absolutely enamored with Garwin, and they're curious about Marta's halfling. So it takes them another day or so hike up into the heights internally of the mountain, and they meet the chief Haskell. The scout Nakel introduces them. They end up having a feast. They learn. They spend 3 days again with this tribe. They learn that there is indeed a legend of the Duago who live in the bowels of this mountain, which is miles below them. They convince the chief to draw a internal map of where they inside the mountain can get to the lower depths, and he agrees to do so. And he offers for their services. Marta again negotiates that they're going to share a percentage, a 1/10 percentage of anything they find or get from the Duago treasure. And so, as payment and thank you and allyship, kind of a treaty, but 1/10 of the value. She's starting to realize maybe she's giving away too much. But she does all that negotiation because she has the charisma +1, which is affecting this reaction table, right, when they negotiate. And the chief offers Knackle their services as a leader who will not only with the map will be useful for them to get back, but Knackle can take them where they need to go to get to the bowels of the mountain maze, the mountain dungeon, right? They travel, and they travel down miles. They don't know how far. Again, Garwin makes a couple of estimated guesses. He fails the D6 check to kind of guess how deep they've gone. Remember, they were high in the mountain, so they could have traveled down, 1.5 miles or 2 miles, and they're not yet even at sea level, right? So they have no idea if they're still in the top of the middle of the mountain or the base of the mountain, but they're inside the Coldwater Mountain. They pass a hidden passage. Garwin, as the dwarf, fails to perceive the passage in a passive check, and I make the check for him, so he doesn't even know that there was a passage. Their traveling formation was Garwin first, the dwarf, Knackle second, and then Marta third, the magic user Baldwin, and then dead last was brother Timothy. Anyway, they pass a hidden passage, and as the last person brother Timothy passes, he is surprised from behind by a giant, 8-legged, hairy, bulbous creature about the size of a cow, with a tiny little head with 24 eyes and fangs. It's a giant spider. I mean, I don't use the phrase. I don't tell them what it is. I just describe it. They all know immediately. Oh, shit, it's a giant spider. Knackle and brother Timothy stand shoulder to shoulder against it. As Knackle, they win initiative, and Knackle, basically accustomed to this kind of threat, dives right in with his spear. Knackle, they witness in the first rounds, this thing does not have webs. There's no webs, but it uses its front 2 legs that are sticky and hairy with like barbs to grab, pull, and bite. So there is a grab attack, which they have to, if they are hit, they have to make a save to break that grab attack. Then it will bite with a bonus, and then of course inject poison. Well, Knackle, they watch in horror as it grabs him, pulls him in, bites him, injects him, and it starts to retreat back into its hidden passage, its lair. Garwin, brother Timothy, is able to hit, and a 25% chance that the creature drops his victim, and the giant spider drops and Knackle's body there. Marta tries to pull Knackle away, and Garwin steps into the hole. The creature waylays brother Timothy. He makes his save versus poison. He's wounded pretty bad. He kind of steps out of the battle as Marta steps in. At the turn 4 or 5, Marta is snatched, pulled, bitten, and she fails her. She makes her poison save, but the damage from that grab and the bite kill her. Right? She gets below. She gets below 0 hit points. Okay. Now my house rule: fight death. Players, when they hit 0, would die like they normally would, and they're given a choice. Do you want to let this character die, or do you want to fight death? And if they want to fight death, they are set at 0, unconscious, and they have to roll 1d6 and subtract that from their constitution as a permanent injury. Katie's in love with Marta. They're on a hunt for her father. She has negotiated and been the face of the group. She's negotiated all of their contracts. She feels like this is her character's kind of adventure. So she accepts the fight death. She doesn't allow herself to die. And even if she had failed her save versus poison, this would keep her from dying. But she didn't. So fortunately, she's not dealing with a poison death. She's dealing with a hit point loss. Again, she has 4 hit points. She suffered 6. She's -2. -2 doesn't matter. It just means she's dead. She rolls a 4. That comes off her constitution permanently as a long-term effect of this combat. So her con is a 10, so she's now down to a 6. So she has a con of 6. Now, if her character ever gets to 0 or less con, she's dead, right? So now she'll have a limp, or she'll have some kind of, effect. Maybe her immune system's compromised for the rest of her life, whatever. But but she ultimately is 0, unconscious, stable. But part of the rule is whatever that negative constitution roll is, and she rolled a 4, is the number of sessions this character is eliminated from play. Because she has to heal, she has to be treated, she has to be cared for. Think of it as coma. She'll be in coma for 4 sessions. It doesn't matter how long those sessions are. This character will be removed from play and has to be cared for and tended for 4 sessions. So she's going to have to make or use her backup character, right? Okay. But she didn't lose Marta permanently, right? Okay. So that's my fight death rule for those who are curious what that is. Garwin and Baldwin angry. The cleric wounded, Marta unconscious, Knackle dead. They leave Brother Timothy there to treat Marta and they follow this creature that they've wounded pretty badly as it retreats into its hidden lair, its passage. And Garwin, not untouched, hasn't been scathed yet, and Baldwin, who has not been hurt yet, angry, pursue it. And they want to kill it. They don't want this killing anything else. They only go about 30 feet into a hidden black, tiny, again, its bulbous body evacuates into this lair. They come into a chamber that reeks of death, partially eaten bodies, skeletons, and it's huddled in the back corner. Garwin can see 60 feet. It's not that far. It's about 25 feet from them. He draws out his flask of oil and he tells Baldwin to generate a torch. They have not been using a torch because they've been trusting Garwin 60 and Knackle's dark vision. So they've been using dark vision to navigate with Knackle and Garwin. He lights a torch. He successfully throws the oil at this creature as it's receding as far away from it as it can, as it's badly wounded. They torch it. I described how it catches fire and it burns and pops and crackles and bursts open as it is an exoskeleton creature. And when it dies, it smolders and rolls up on its back, all of its legs curled up. And they've defeated this thing. So they scored a big fat XP for that. They root through this lair, unearthing backpacks and old armor that's been ruined, and they find 2 rings, 3 scrolls, and 2 swords. Garwin, the dwarf, is able to discover the 2 swords and the bow are worthy of keeping, but he can't tell any more than that. They're old. This is not the ideal place to examine them, but they're worth keeping. and the bow needs to be restrung and everything, but he can tell the bow is of marvelous quality. They evacuate with the goods. Oh, and they get they don't know the value totally, but roughly 312 gold coins, various coins worth 312 gold. 2 rings, 3 scrolls, and 2 swords. So they have 312 gold from this lair, and maybe some valuables. Who knows what? They can't tell immediately. They come out of the lair, and they agree that they want to bury Knackle. So they bury him, and they make camp pretty much right in this open passage, close to this, because they figure it's fairly safe. Any creatures that come and go through here probably know of the spider, and they stay away from it, and they know there's nothing that's going to come out of that lair because they've killed him. So they think they're going to camp here, but they don't want to camp in this grotesque chamber of dead bodies and corpses. But they camp in the hall, they camp in the passage, and they bury Knackle on the far west side of the passage. In the middle of the night, meanwhile, Katie has created Tirsa, a gnome, and she asked, can I make a gnome? And I said, sure, why not? We're going to consider it the same as a dwarf. And she wants to create Knackle's sister, Tirsa, who has been quietly following them for days as they descend into the mountain bowels. And so in the middle of the night, on Baldwin's watch, and Marta is still in coma, unconscious, Tirsa comes out of the dark and says hello to Baldwin. They wake everybody up, which affects which will end Timothy's chance to heal 1 HP. He did get a binding post-combat. He got a binding point back from Garwin treating him, but this interrupted rest will not allow him to get his 1 hit point back anyway. Well, you need 24 hours anyway, which they probably weren't going to do. Anyway, Tirsa says, where's Knackle? They say, we buried him over there. Brother Timothy said prayers for his soul. And she says, no. So Katie says, no, we don't, that isn't our way. That isn't how we do it. And Katie demands they dig it up. And Josh and Katie argue as Brother Timothy and Tirsa, the gnome. And again, they have to be fighters. So halflings are thieves. Humans can be thieves, but halflings have to be fighters. Dwarves have to be fighters. Therefore, she's basically a warrior gnome. Same as Knackle. Knackle was a scout warrior fighter, basically, but a gnome monster. But she made a character gnome. I said just use dwarf, right? So she's the gnome, Tirsa, sister of Knackle. And she says no, and they have this argument, this debate. He's like, you'll condemn his soul to hell, to Hades, if you dig him up. And she says, no, I must take him back to he must have the funeral among his people. And Garwin and Baldwin basically side with her and say, you've got to allow her to take her brother home. You say prayers as we exhume his body, but you've got to let her take her brother back. Matter of fact, we should help, and we should take Marta with him. So they dig him up. Brother Timothy says prayers over the entire process. Garwin carries Marta. Brother Timothy helps or carries Knackle for Tirsa, and they go back. It takes them 2 days to get back to the village. Once at the village, they have and I let Katie, I say, Katie, tell me since these gnomes don't bury their dead, what do they do? And she describes that they have a funeral and a feast, and they ultimately climb to a cave up and above here that is behind the beautiful waterfall, and they will wrap the body and they will dispose of the body into the waterfall, and it will fall obviously down into the cold water depths of the lake where it gets a burial. That's the gnome funeral process, and it was so cool. So she describes how they have a funeral. They prepare the body, they then wrap the body, they have a feast, they wrap the body, and then an entire entourage of family, and those, as part of their inner circle of family, friends, whatever, will hike to a cave mouth that's behind the waterfall, and they will put the body into the waterfall and send it to its watery, cold water burial. Very cool. And that's where we stopped. And this was 23 complete days. Session 3, about 7.5 hours. 23 days of playtime, of game time. They ended up collecting and dividing among all of them 235 XP, equally divided. Again, they have to spend any gold that's part of that before they could level up. And of course, they haven't spent any of that gold yet. They don't know yet what the rings are. They don't know what the scrolls are. However, Baldwin, magic user, I allow all magic users to have read magic, and it only makes sense they would know that. And so he's able to look at the scrolls, and he's able to tell they are higher level magic user spells, but he can't read that higher level. Okay, but he knows that he's got them. He can transcribe them into his spell book for safekeeping. And as he gets to the appropriate level, he will be able to discern what these runic magic runes tell him they are. But he has 3 spells that he's going to scribble into his spellbook. They have 2 swords and a bow. The bow is, again, beautiful. It needs to be restrung. It is elven. It looks to be elven make. The 2 swords are standard swords. However, they don't know if there's any, but they have a higher quality hilt. They clean up well, so they're not certain if there's something about them that could be advantageous. And then 2 rings, which they have no idea what these are, and none of them, by the time we finished session, they weren't prepared to put these rings on. Okay, and that's it. So Marta uses my house rule, fights death. She will be in a coma for at least 4 sessions. She has a gnome character named Tirsa, that is the surviving sister of Knackle, who had been their guide. And they have a friendly village of gnomes that is sharing their food and their homes with them, and that's their kind of headquarters right now. And that's where we wrapped it up, and it was amazing. I think they really liked... so Knackle, as an NPC, I'm not going to sunder their gear. And there's an NPC, so when he hits 0, he's dead. If a monster hits 0, they're dead. So there was no sundering for the NPC Knackle. None of the damage that Timothy and Marta, being a thief, didn't have a shield or a helmet to sunder. If she had had a helmet, you can't use a shield, but she could have had a helmet. She now knows the value of a helmet. So she knows now that when she gets a helmet, that it could be used to sunder. So that kind of gives the thief and the magic user something to sunder, since they can't use shields. So both Phil and Katie have basically said we're going to get helmets as soon as we can, because it would give them a ability to sunder a big attack. That's it. So this particular session, they met the Hoodoo gnomes, Chief Haskell. They met Binford Himlane, the fisherman. His first name is Binford. Himlane is the fisherman. Paul and Paul Younger are staying with Binford at the fishing dock with a mule and a cart. They have traveled 10-15 more days up the river to get to the lake and into the mountain, and then they traveled a couple of days in the mountain and around the lake. 23 complete days all told, and they get 5 XP for those 23 days each. So 23 times 5, what is that? 115 XP each or something. Oh wait, it's right here. Yeah, 115 XP each for their 23 days of survival. They defeated and escaped 18 orcs, so they got 270 XP for that. They killed a giant spider, 240 XP for that. They recovered 312 gold coins various coins of value of 312. Again, they won't get the XP for that until they spend it. 2 rings, 3 scrolls. Great session as usual. So I'm very tired. I'm recovering from, I was pretty sick earlier in the week, very sick actually earlier in the week. I thought I might have to delay or cancel or postpone Saturday's session. I was so under the weather during the week, but Friday I was feeling better, and Saturday morning I said let's do it, and I went, and great stuff. So thank you for listening. Long recap, I know, This has been the Unknown Lands campaign White Box Fantastic Medieval Adventure Game.